This is the key to worksheet on topic 5, part B, and this is the factoring extra number 3. So let's look at the first problem. So number 1, you have 25x squared minus 65x minus 30. So you have this polynomial and you want to factor this polynomial. Remember, the first thing you have to do when factoring a polynomial is to always factor out the GCF if it's other than 1. And so if you look at those three terms, 25x squared, a negative 65x, and a negative 30, those three terms, the GCF is 5. They all have a factor of 5 in common. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to say that's going to equal 5 times, so you're factoring it out. So you're going to rise a product, 5 times, and then whatever your three terms in here needs to be to get this back. So 5 times 5x squared is 25x squared. And then 5 times a negative, and if you have to use your calculator, use your calculator. Don't guess at any of these answers. So 65 divided by 5 will be 13. So you get 13x. And then minus, and then 5 times 6 is 30. Okay? Now, that's not the answer, because now you have to go to this trinomial right here and see if you can factor it. So always go off to the side so you can do your work, because you can be doing that trial and error. So you may need more. So if your first try doesn't work, you try something else. Okay, and then your answer goes here. And so I have 5x squared minus 13x minus 6. And so so notice now, you can always tell if you factor out the GCF, because if you look at these three terms, the GCF of those three terms here is now 1. Okay? So that means that you did correctly factor out the GCF from the beginning. So let's go ahead now and do the two binomials. And so we're going to use the reverse FOIL. So remember, you want to complete these two factors. So 5x times x is 5x squared. The last sign's negative, so that means these signs in here are the same. So one's positive, one's negative. It may be that this one's a negative one, this one's a positive one. And then for 6, the possibilities are 3 and 2. So let's put 3, 2, 6, 1. So there's all kinds of possibilities for 6. 3, 2, 6, and 1. So let's put the 3 here and the 2 there and see what happens, because that's what most of you are going to do. So you're going to exactly do what I just did. But you have to make sure that what you have is going to give this back. All right, so we're using the idea of that FOIL. So 5x times x is 5x squared, so my f is okay. Now let's look at the L. A positive 3 times a negative 2 is a negative 6, so that's good. Now let's do the outer and the inner. The outer is a negative 10x. The inner is a positive 3x, right? And when you add them up, you get a negative 7x, but that's not what you wanted. You wanted a negative 13x, so that didn't work. So that did not work. So let's try something else. So let's try, now remember 5 is prime, so there's only one possibility for 5. So we still have to use 5x, and we still have to use x. But in this situation, though, instead of saying put the 3 with the 5x and the 2 with the x, let's go ahead and switch those. So let's say plus 2 minus 3. All right, and see what happens. So let's check it. Let's do the FOIL. 5x times x is 5x squared. A positive 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. The outer is negative 15x. The inner, 2 times x is 2x. And when I add them up, I get negative 13x. And that's exactly what you wanted. So those two factors are now going to go here. Don't forget, though, part of your answer is that GCF. Okay, because if all you put is this is the answer, then what you're saying was that the original problem was only this, but that was not the original problem. The original problem was this. So don't forget about the 5. So you get 5 times 5x plus 2 times x minus 3. Now let me just say something. Someone else could have rewritten it, and instead of saying x minus 3 times 5x plus 2, instead of saying 5x plus 2 times x minus 3, they could have said x minus 3 times 5x plus 2. That's because multiplication is commutative. But we always tend to put the monomial factor first. So this monomial, this is a binomial, we put the monomial factor first. All right, so that's the answer. Okay, number 2, we have 2b squared minus 14b minus 156. So 2b squared minus 14b minus 156. So the GCF of those two terms is 2. So the GCF is 2. So that means I'm going to factor out at 2, and so I get 2 times b squared is 2b squared, minus 2 times 7b is a negative 14b, and then 2 times 78, that's 7 right here, and then and then 2 times a negative 78 will give us a negative 156. Okay? All right, now let's go off to the side and kind of work with this trinomial now. So we have b squared minus 7b minus 78. So we're going to try factoring this as two binomials. Now, if you notice this trinomial, the GCF is 1, so that means you did this part correct. You did factor out the GCF. So there's only one possibility for b squared. It's b times b. So b goes here, b goes there, because b times b is b squared. Now let's talk about the last sign. See, the last sign's negative? So at this point, you need to also recognize that since the last sign's negative, that means one of these is positive, the other one's negative. Okay? And it may turn out that I may have to switch these at some point. Now let's go back to 78. So let's talk about this for a little while. 78. So I'm going to just go ahead and kind of do this here, because some of you may need to do this idea. So let's talk about 78 for a moment. So 78, we know there are several possibilities for 78. There's 2 times, and then again, just use your calculator if you need to. And then for, now if you look at 39, now this way I would think about the factors. So 2 times 39 is 78. 78 was prime, so I said 2 times 39. Okay. Now look at 39. 39, there's a factor of 3 in there. So I could say 3 times, and then use your calculator. 78 divided by 3 gives me 26. Okay. And then there's some other possibilities that in here, because look, so if you go back to 39, so when I did 39 divided by 3, notice I get 13, right? Okay. And then you see this 26, this and 13's prime. But if you go back to this 26 right here, 26, there's also a factor of 2 in there. So I can say 3 times 2 is 6. I can say 6 times, and then 78 divided by 6 gives me 13. Okay, so that's that 13 that was here. So 39 divided by 3 is 13, so I can say 13 times 6 as well. All right, and then let's see, there's some others in here. 78 is not an easy number to deal with. I'll give you that. I think that's it. So that's about all you can do with this. Okay? All right. Now, what I would do next is I would use the numbers closer together in the number line. I would try this first, 6 and 13. So let's go back to this part now. So let's put the 6 here, the 13 here, see what happens. If that doesn't work, I may have to switch them. All right, so let's check it. So using FOIL. So b times b is b squared, so the f is okay. The last, a positive 6 times a negative 13 is a negative 78, so that's okay. Oops, I went on another page. All right, the out and the inner. So the outer is negative 13b. The inner is 6b. When I add them up, I do get a negative 7b, and that's what you wanted. So this is correct. So my answer then is 2 times b plus 6 times b minus 13. All right, or you could have said 2 times b minus 13 times b plus 6. Does not matter. Okay? All right, so that was number 2. So let's look at number 3. All right, so number 3, we have y to the 4th plus 9y cubed plus 14y squared. All right, and so if you look at those 3 terms, the GCF is y squared. So the GCF is y squared. So I'm going to factor out a y squared. So I get y squared times y squared is y to the 4th plus y squared times 9y. Because remember, when you multiply like bases, you add exponents. So y squared times y squared is y to the 4th. 2 plus 2 is 4. Y squared times y, 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay? And then plus 14. Y squared times 14 gives you 14 y squared. So now let's go off to the side and figure this part out. So let's factor y squared plus 9y plus 14. Now that's the easy kind because that's a 1 right here. So that makes things so much easier. and this is the last sign's positive. And there's only two possibilities, 14. 7, 2, 14, 1, and you know which one it is because you wanted that 9. All right, so let's go ahead and factor this. Now notice the GCF is 1 here, so that means what you did is correct. Okay, so y times y is y squared. The last sign's positive. Both of these are going to be the same. It's going to be that middle sign. And then for 14, 7 and 2 is what you're going to try, and it works. Because look, the outer is 2y, the inner is 7y. When I add them up, I get 9y. So that's going to go here. So the answer is going to be y squared times y plus 7 times y plus 2. All right, so that's number 3. Okay, let's look at number 4. Number 4, we have this. So we have 20v cubed minus 11v squared minus 3v. So the GCF of those three terms is just v. So I'm going to factor out a v from those three terms. So I get v times 20v squared is 20v cubed minus v times 11v is 11v squared, and then minus v times 3, v times a negative 3 is a negative 3v. Now let's go off to the side and kind of figure out how to factor this part here. So this trinomial, 20v squared minus 11v minus 3. All right, so notice the GCF is 1, so that's a good sign that we did take out the GCF to begin with. So let's go ahead and factor this. So for 20v squared, remember this is 20v squared. For 20v squared, there are several possibilities. There's 5v times 4v, there's 10v times 2v, there's 20v times v. All right, so let's try the 5v and the 4v first. So let's put 5v, 4v. Now the last sign's negative. That means these signs are different. So let's say plus minus. It may be the minus plus that we may need to use. Now now remember the constant's a negative 3, but I've already taken care of that negative part. So let's talk about the 3 only. So for 3, the possibility of 3, since 3 is prime, is 1 and 3. So let's put the 3 here, the 1 there, see what happens. Okay? All right, so let's check. So FOIL. So we're going to check by FOIL. So 5v times 4v is 20v squared. So my F is okay. 3 times a negative 1 is a negative 3. My L is okay. Now let's do the outer and the inner. The outer is negative 5v. The inner is a 12v. When I add them up, I get 7v, and that's not what you wanted. So that did not work. So let's redo this. So let's put the 5v and 4v again. So let's still try that. And let's do the plus and the minus again. And this time, though, instead of putting the 3 here, let's put the 1 there. So put 1 here, 3 there, see if that works. All right, let's do the outer and the inner now. The outer is a negative 15v. The inner is a 4v. When I add them up, I get a negative 11v, and now it works. So there's your answer. So the answer will be v times 5v plus 1 times 4v minus 3. And remember, we always put the monomial part first. Number 5. Number 5, we have 9x squared plus 9x plus 21x squared minus 30. Now here's a situation where it's not in descending order. So in our lessons, we learned that when you're dealing with factoring polynomials, you want to make sure it's in descending order. So this is not in descending order. So I'm going to put the x squared first. So I get 21x squared, then plus 9x minus 30. All right, so that's what you have to do there first. Now, if you look at what you have now, you notice that the GCF of those three terms is 3. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to factor out at 3. But again, the first thing you have to do is to put in descending order. So I get 3 times 7x squared is 21x squared, plus 3 times 3x is 9x, and then 3 times a negative 10 is a negative 30. Now let's go off to the side and see if we can factor this. So 7x squared plus 3x minus 10. And then this is not a bad one because 7 is a prime number, so we can easily deal with that. Notice the GCF here is 1, which is a good thing. That means that you did factor out the greatest common factor. So 7x and x are the only possibilities for 7x squared. So we know that has to go there. The last sign's negative, so that means these signs are different. So for right now, just put plus and minus. It may be minus plus you need. Now let's go about 10. There are two possibilities for 10. There are two possibilities for 10. So remember, for 10, you have 10 times 1, 5 times 2. Let's just try 5 and 2 for right now. 5 and 2. Now, let's go ahead and put the 5 here, the 2 there. See what happens. If it doesn't work, we'll switch the 5 and the 2, see if that works. So now, let's check it. 7x times x is 7x squared. A positive 5 times a negative 2 is a negative 10. Now let's make sure I get this middle term. The outer is a negative 14x. The inner is a 5x. When I add them up, I get a negative 9x. So that did not work. So let's just switch the 5 and the 2 now. So let's go ahead and rewrite this. 7x plus 2 minus 5. So I just switched the 5 and the 2. See if that works. Okay, let's check it. The outer now becomes negative 35x. The inner becomes 2x. When I add them up, I get a negative 33x. That didn't work. All right, now I want you to notice something. 7 is prime, so I couldn't do anything else with that. I've exhausted all possibilities for the 5 and the 2. So I did the 5 and the 2. I did the 2 and the 5. I switched them. So that means since I tried all combinations of 5 and 2, let's try now 10 and 1. So let's do the 10 and the 1. So I'm going to go, I'm running out of room here, so let's go over here. So 7x, x plus minus. So let's put 10 here, 1 there, see what happens. Okay? So now the outer, let's just make sure I get the first and the last. So 7x times x is 7x squared. A positive 10 times a negative 1 is a negative 10. Now let's do the on the inner. The outer is 7x. The inner is 10x. When I add them up, I'm sorry, negative 7x, excuse me. Negative 7x, the inner is 10x. When I add them up, I do get 3x, and that's what you wanted. So now this is correct. So the answer is 3 times 7x plus 10 times x minus 1. So those are your factors. Okay, so remember in problems 1 through 5 at this point, you had 3 factors. 3 is a factor, 7x plus 10 is a factor, x minus 1 is a factor. And you write as a product, just like this. Okay, number 6. Number 6, we have negative 15a squared minus 19a plus 56. All right, now I want you to notice it is in descending order, but the coefficient of the square term is negative. So you want to factor out a negative GCF. So go and factor out a negative GCF. So in this case, my negative GCF, let's see, 15, negative 15, negative 19, and 56 is 1. So it'll be a negative 1 you're going to factor out. Okay? So I'm going to say negative 1 times 15a squared is negative 15a squared. A negative 1 times a positive 19a is a negative 19a. And a negative 1 times a negative 56 is a positive 56. Now let's go off to the side and factor this trinomial. So I have 15a squared plus 19a minus 56. Now notice this GCF here is now 1. So that means I did factor out what I wanted. So let's do the two binomials. For 15a squared, there are two possibilities for 15a squared. There's 3a times 5a, and there's 15a times a. Let's just do the 3 and the 5a first. So let's say 3a, 5a. And the reason I'm doing that first because they're close together the number line. Now, remember I used that idea here, it did not work. The ones that are close together the number line did not work. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But always do that first. Okay, so let's talk about, and the last sign's negative, so that means these signs are different. Okay, and remember you want the out and the inner to be that to add up to a positive 19a, so you got to check that. All right, now let's do the 56, negative 56. All right, so we're going to write 56 down. We're going to think about possibilities for 56. So I know that 56, use your calculator. 56, I know 56 times 1 is one of them, a pair of factors. 56 divided by 2, so 2 times 28. Knows that 2 is still a factor of 28, so I can say 4 So in other words, 56 divided by 4. So I get 4 times 14, right? Notice that 2 is still a factor of 14, so I can say 4 times 2 is 8, so I can say 56 divided by 8 is 7, so I get 8 times 7. And I think that is all the possibilities. Now what I want to do first is if you look at all these pairs, 8 and 7 are close together, so let's try that. Remember, it doesn't always work. We saw that, but let's try it first anyway. So 8 and 7. So let's put the 8 here, the 7 there. All right, just try something. If it doesn't work, we'll switch them. All right, so let's check it using FOIL. 3a times 5a is 15a squared. So in terms of FOIL, my F is okay. Now let's go to the L. A positive a times a negative 7 is a negative 56. I'm good there. Let's do the on the inner, because remember, you got to make sure you get that 19a, and that's from that on the inner. So if you look at the outer, 3a times a negative 7 is a negative 21a. A times 5, 8 times 5a is 40a. And when you add them up, you get 19a, and that's what you wanted. So that's correct. So the answer will be negative 1 times 3a plus 8 times 5a minus 7. Okay? And remember, always put the monomial factor first. Okay, number 7, we have negative 100c cubed minus 40c squared, and then plus 96c. Okay, so we have that. Now, in number 7, again, you see where it is in descending order, but you see where the coefficient's negative? So we're going to factor out a negative GCF. So in this case, though, it's not negative 1 like it was here. It's going to be a negative. You see, you have a negative 100, a negative 40, and a positive 96 in terms of your coefficients. And so the GCF of those is 4, because 4 goes into 96 as well. Okay, so check it. You see, look, you have 96 divided by 4 is a whole number. Okay, so your GCF is going to be a negative 4. Now look at your variables. So you got to check your variables also. There are variables in every term. There are 3 factors of c here, 2 factors of c here, 1 factor of c here. So the GCF of those c cubed, c squared, and c is just c. You always use the one with the smallest exponent. So negative 4c. So now you're going to factor out a negative 4c, and then you're going to get, all right, so here's what you got to do now. So a negative times a positive is a negative. So let's talk about 100. So 100 divided by 4, 100 divided by 4, is 25, right? So you get 25. C times c squared is c cubed, so that's what I get here. A negative times a positive is a negative. 4 times 10 is 40. And then c times c is c squared. So that's going to be my middle term there. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. So you need a negative there. And then 96 divided by 4 is 24. And then you've already, see, you had a c here. You're taking it out, so you don't need any c's there. So don't put a c. That's all you need. Negative 4c times a negative 24 is a positive 96c. All right, now let's go off to the side and kind of see if we can factor this. All right, so I have 25c squared plus 10c minus 24. Okay, so the GCF here is now 1, which means you did this part correct. So let's go ahead and do the 2 binomials. Now 25 is going to be an easy one because there are only 2 possibilities. 5 times 5 is 1, and then 25 times 1 is the other. Let's try 5 and 5. So 5c, 5c. The last sign's negative. That means these signs are different. Plus, minus. And remember, you got to make sure, always make sure your outer inner gives you that 10c back. All right. And now let's talk about 24. 24 is going to be a little bit more challenging, but let's talk about it. So 24, there is 2 times 12, 4 times 6, and then 24 times 1, and then 3 times 8, right? So those are the possibilities. What I'm going to do first, because we've always talked about that, is try the 4 and the 6 first. So the ones close together, the number line, see if that works. Okay? Because that was our strategy to begin with. All right, now let's put the 4 here, the 6 there, see what happens. Okay, so let's check. The outer is 5c times the negative 6 is negative 30c. The inner, 4 times 5c is 20c. When I add them up, I get a negative 10c. But well, what I want is a positive 10c. So I'm almost there because those are opposites. So that means all you do is just change the signs. So in other words, this is now become, now let's go ahead and say, now write as, we're going to say 5c minus 4, 5c plus 6. Now check it though. Still check to make sure you did this correctly. 5c times 5c is 25c squared. A negative 4 times a positive 6 is a negative 24. Now the out and the inner. The outer is now 30c. The inner is a negative 20c. When you add them up, you get 10c, and that is what you wanted. So that's going to go here. So I get negative 4c times 5c minus 4 times 5c plus 6. Okay, so that's the answer there. And again, always make sure you put the monomial factors first. Okay, now let's talk about number 8. Number 8, we have this in number 8. We have 40a squared minus 26aw minus 30w squared. Okay, so now we have two variables again. The GCF of all those three terms is just 2. No variables because there are no a's in all of them and there are no w's in all of them. Okay, so the only GCF here is 2. GCF is 2. All right, now if you factor out the 2, you get 2 times 20a squared is 40a squared minus 2 times a negative 13aw is a negative 26aw. 2 times a negative 15w squared is a negative 30w squared. And now if you take this trinomial, rewrite it here, just like I'm doing, you'll notice that the GCF here is now 1, which is a good sign. You did this correct at the beginning. Now let's go ahead and factor this as two binomials. Now remember, you have two variables, so you got to make sure you do in your binomials correctly. For 20a squared, remember 20a squared, and I may have already written it out, but let's do it again. So I'm going to put 20a squared here. For 20a squared, there are several possibilities. There's 2a times 10a, there's 5a times 4a, and then there's 20a times a. Let's try the 5 and the 4 first. It may not work, but let's just try it first. So let's put the 5a here, 4a here. The last sign's negative, so that means these signs are different. Now remember, you always need to make sure you get that middle sign here, the middle term, by looking at the outer and inner when you're done. So let's put the plus and minus here. It may not be plus and minus, it may be minus plus. We'll see. 15 is easy because there's only two possibilities for 15w squared. There's only two possibilities of 15w squared. 5w, 3w. 15w, 1w. Let's try 5w and 3w. All right, now remember our discussion in previous lessons. Don't put the 5w here with the 5a because remember, we had that discussion before. If you put the 5a plus 5w, you know you can factor out a 5, which means that the original problem, all these terms would be divisible by 5, and they're not because 26 is not divisible by 5. Okay, so be careful. Don't put, based on what we've done before, you know how to think about this now. So that's what you got to start thinking about. Make things easy on yourself. So you know that if you're going to use 5w and 3w, you cannot put the 5 here. You have to put the 3w here, and then put the 5w here. Okay. All right. So always think about this idea. All right. Now let's check. 5a times 4a is 20a squared. Let's go to the last. A positive 5w times a negative 5w is a negative 15w squared. The outer is a negative 25aw. The inner 3w times 4a is 12aw. When I add them up, a 12 and a negative 25 is a negative 13, and I get negative 13aw, and that's what you wanted. All right, so the answer is going to be 2 times 5a plus 3w times 4a minus 5w. All right, number 9, we have 20v cubed minus 17v squared minus 63v. Number 9. So number 9, you'll notice that the GCF here is just v. That's the GCF, v. That's all it is. So we're going to factor out of v. So I get v times 20v squared is going to be 20v cubed. When you distribute, v times a negative 17v is a negative 17v squared. And then v times a negative 63 is going to be a negative 63v. Now let's take this trinomial, rewrite it here, and then see if we can factor it. 20v squared minus 17v minus 63. All right, now that's going to be a little bit more challenging. Now notice, first of all, that the GCF is 1, so which means you did this correct. So I'm going to go directly to the two binomials. This is going to be a little bit more challenging because there are several possibilities for 20, and there are several possibilities for negative 63. So it may take us 2 or 3 tries before we get the right one. So for 20v, let's try the 5 and the 4 first. So let's say 5v, 4v. It may not be the one that works, but let's just try that first. Okay, the last sign's negative. That means that one's positive, one's negative. It may be that this one's the one that's negative, this one's that's positive, but let's just leave it like that for right now. Let's talk about 63. Now, I want you to note that if someone ever asks you what is the constant, you say negative 63, okay? Because that's what the constant is. But when I'm going to write it here, I'm going to put a 63 because I already know that one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative, and that's how I'm going to get that negative 63. But for 63, the possibilities are 3 times 21, 7 times, use your calculator if you can't figure that out, but 7 times, that's going to be 7 times 9, okay? And then let's see what else. I think that, and then 63 times 1, but I think that may be it, okay? So let's try 7 and 9 first. Let's try 7 and 9 for that one. All right, now, so let's put the 9 here, 7 there, and see if that works, okay? If it doesn't work, we'll switch them and see what happens. Okay, so 5v times 4v is 20v squared. Now, positive 9 times a negative 7 is a negative 63. So that, in terms of FOIL, I've taken care of the F and the L. So that seems to work so far, okay? But remember, you got to do the out and the inner because you want to make sure you get that negative 17v. So that outer 5v times a negative 7 is a negative 35v. The inner 9 times 4v is a positive 36v. And when I add them up, 36 and negative 35 is just a positive 1, so I just get v, and that's not what I wanted. So that didn't work. So let's try something else. So let's go to our second try. So let's still use 5v and 4v for the first, and still say plus minus, but instead of putting the 9 here, let's put the 7 here. So it'll be 7 and 9, see what happens. So 5v times 4v is 20v squared, so my F is still correct. Positive 7 times a negative 9 is a negative 63, so my L is correct. Now let's do the out and the inner. The outer, 5 times a negative 9 is a negative 45v. 5v times negative 9 is negative 45v. The inner, 7 times 4v is 28v. And when I add them up, I get a negative 17v, and that's what you wanted. All right, so we're going to get the answer to be v times 5v plus 7 times 4v minus 9. Okay, so that was number 9. And then number 10, we have 18x squared minus 51xy plus 36y squared. Okay, so it looks like the GCF of those 3 terms is just going to be 3. So the GCF is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out at 3. So I get 3 times 6x squared is 18x squared. 3 times a, what's that, 17, I think? Let's see. Yep, 17 xy. 3 times 7, negative 17xy gives me a negative 51xy. And then 3 times a 12 is 36, and we get y squared. All right, now let's go off to the side. Go off to the side, rewrite this over, and kind of figure out, that's an xy here, kind of figure out how to factor this. So the GCF of those three terms is now 1, which is a good sign. You did this part correct. So now we'll just do the two binomials. For 6x squared, there are two possibilities. There's 6 and 1, 3 and 2. So let's try 3 and 2 first. So let's put the 3x here, 2x there. This is a good one because the last sign is positive. So it means these signs in here are the same. And they're both going to be negative. So minus, minus. All right, now let's talk about 12y squared. For 12y squared, there are several possibilities. There's 12y times y. There's 6y times 2y. There's 4y times 3y. Okay? So remember, our strategy is always use the one close together the number line. If that doesn't work, we'll try one of these other two. So let's try 4y and 3y first. Now I'm going to ask you this. Are you going to put the 3y with this? No. If you put the 3y with this, remember we can factor out at 3, which means that if I factor out at 3, which means that all these terms here are divisible by 3, these right here, and they're not. 17 is not divisible by 3. So let's put the 4y here and the 3y here instead. And so now notice this now GCF is 1, and this GCF is 1 as well. So again, this is what I was saying. Let me go ahead and just kind of do that here. So we had 3x minus and then 2x minus. And then we were asking ourselves, if I'm going to try 4y and 3y, make things easy on yourself. Think about what you're about to do. If I put 3y here, that's not going to help me. And it's not going to help me because I can factor out at 3. If I factor out at 3 from here, then that means that all these terms here are divisible by 3. These are, this one's not. The same thing here. If I put the 3y and then the 4y here, that means that I can factor out a 2 from here, which also implies that all these terms for this one, because that's what I'm factoring now, all these terms are divisible by 2, and 17 is not divisible by 2. So I know that that cannot be true. All right, so always think like that. Because if this GCF is 1 right here, then all of these better be 1s. Okay, so you never should have anything that looks like this. If this GCF is 1, then never should you have anything where you can factor out these. Okay, so now let's just make sure that what we have is correct. So in terms of FOIL, we're using the idea of FOIL here. 3x times 2x is 6x squared, so my F is okay. Let's talk about the last. A negative 4y times a negative 3y is a positive 12y squared, so my L is okay. Now let's do the out and the inner. The outer, a negative 3x times a negative 3y is a negative 9xy. The inner, a negative 4y times a positive 2x is a negative 8xy, and a negative 8 and a negative 9 is a negative 17. So I get negative 17xy, and that's what you wanted. So this is correct. So the answer is going to be, don't forget the binomial factor, 3 times, and then these two binomials. So 3x minus 4y times 2x minus 3y. Okay? All right, so that is going to be the key to this worksheet.